Welcome back to Figure Depot. Today we're taking a look at a somewhat older figure, but it's one that I realized I had never reviewed, and so we're going to take a look at him today. It's the Masters of the Universe Classics and DC Universe Classics by Mattel 2-pack He-Man. It came with the Superman figure, just a basic Superman figure from the DC Universe Classics line, a re-release of that figure. And then they were trying to bring the Matty Collector He-Man figures kind of to the retail market and give it a test run, I suppose. I wish that it had stuck a little better and we had gotten all these figures at retail, but I think they continued to pretty much be Matty Collector Club exclusives, but was fortunate enough to be able to get a hold of a couple of these sets. I picked up the He-Man Superman 2-pack, and I picked up the Skeletor and Lex Luthor 2-pack. So anyway, today we're going to take a look at the He-Man. It's basically the same sculpt with just a slightly different repaint as the original release of the He-Man back in, I think it was 2008. These came out a couple years later, so anyway, let's get a closer look at him and see what accessories he has, check out his articulation, and just get a close-up look at the figure. As you can see, he has a lot of nice detail. It's not overly detailed, simply because He-Man is a simpler figure. He doesn't have a very elaborate costume, just a chest plate, shield. He's got his belt and loincloth, a couple wrist bracers. He's sporting a classic axe and shield, which again has a slightly different repaint than what it classically is. And then the Sword of Power. And then you'll notice he also has his boots that are wrapped in leather with the fuzzy little tops there. So really nice figure, lots of great detail, and just right for what you want. It's a really awesome nod that Mattel has done, kind of going back and looking like the classic figures but with updated articulation. Four Horsemen, of course, did the sculpts for these, and they look really nice. They did the DC Universe Classics figures as well. And Super 7 took over doing the Masters line recently within the last few years, and then I think Mattel has actually either gotten the license back or is sharing the license. I'm not exactly sure, because they've recently released some more figures. And I don't think it was Super 7, I think it was Mattel, and it was the Snake Mountain figure set. Several figures in that line that I've seen recently. So I don't know if it's transitioning back to Mattel permanently or if they're both gonna make them or what, but you can look online and check that information out. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I think the Power Sword actually came with Skeletor, but I'm using it with my He-Man figure, and I'm taking the Ram Staff and the sword from the 2002 He-Man series and using them with my Skeletor from this series, and they look fine together. I would one day like to get some of the figures in the traditional paint schemes that they originally came in, but for now just have these special edition 2-pack figures, but they're really nice, and it's the same exact molds for the most part. It's just some different paint details, so it does just fine. I really like this Power Sword. It's a two-tone. This is more of a translucent yellow. I don't know if you can tell, but you can see through it. And then it's got a solid yellow, golden yellow here over the top, and it coordinates really well with his bracers and his blonde hair. But anyway. And then he actually came with his shield here, which just clips onto the back of his hand there. And then his battle axe here, which is really awesome. It's a two-tone silver as well. The metal looking parts are that shiny, bright silver, and then you have a darker gray for what would be like the steel components. So looks really good. Very pleased with the accessories. Alright, for the articulation, he does have a ball peg And these came with interchangeable heads, so you could pop them on and off and swap them out with other heads that came in the series. Doesn't look down a whole lot. He does look up fairly well, and he does have a decent torso crunch forward, a little bit more so back, and then he of course has a waist swivel. We get 360 rotation there at the arms, and they do come straight out to the side. We get a bicep swivel, and then not quite 90-degree bend, single jointed elbow, and we do have a swivel but no hinge at the wrist. Then his legs are on a hinge system there, and so they will go out, not quite a full split. They will come up, they would go just about 90, but the loincloth gets in the way. It is pliable, so it will move, but it does hinder the articulation just a little bit. He does have a 90-degree bend at the knee, and then we get a boot cut, swivel cut there. And then we do have ankle rocker, but no ankle pivot. So probably the only things that really don't stand up to today's articulation is the pivot component, which definitely needs for some of the more dynamic poses. So his feet aren't kicked up to the side whenever you spread his legs out. And then some hinges here at the wrists would pretty much bring this up to present articulation standards for what we would see in, say, a Marvel Legends line or something like that. But still great articulation, still very poseable, and you can still get some really great pictures with him. His harness will hold the power sword, and just slide it down in there, kind of sit it either way. It works best that way because there's a little notch that kind of nestles right in there. You can also put the axe in there. You just stick the handle right in there, and you can support the axe. I think it actually sits a little better that way, maybe. I don't know, you can play around with it. You can stick it down in here too. You don't even have to go through that slit. It just depends on how much of it you want to see from the back whenever he's got it in there. And then also, I don't think that the shield is probably the only thing that doesn't really sit in there that great. You can clip it on there, but it tends to roll right back off. It's not really going to hold if you move the figure around very much, but you can get it to stay there briefly if you're careful with it, but it will roll forward and fall off. You can see after taking it on and off of his wrist, not a whole lot of times, but I guess fairly regularly, it's started to warp the plastic here, so I'm worried about that breaking over time. So just be careful if you're gonna use this figure a lot to not really pop that on and off just a whole bunch, because the stress definitely does affect the plastic. And for size comparisons, first up we have He-Man with his counterpart in this series, the Skeletor figure, and you can see they scale exactly the same. He-Man's head's a little wider, and Skeletor's got a bit of a hood on, so he may be just a hair taller with the crest of the hood, but as far as where their faces line up, they're exactly the same height-wise. And here he is next to the Beastman figure from the 2002 animated series figure line, and you can see that, you know, he's squatted down, so if he was standing completely erect, he would definitely be at least the same height as He-Man, if not just a hair taller. But he does scale better with the He-Man from that series. So there's a look at that He-Man. And you can see they, of course, scale much better together. Here is He-Man next to the Mattel Battle Lion, which actually goes with King Grayskull, which is He-Man's ancestor. But I thought it looked really cool, and I really loved the look of this lion. It just looks fantastic, and so I picked this up maybe 3 or 4 years ago around Christmas time with some Christmas money, and have really enjoyed this figure ever since. It's fully posable and very articulate, and just a really neat figure, and I think goes really well with this He-Man figure. If you're curious about how he compares with the 2002 Battle Cat from the cartoon series, he is just a hair smaller than the Battle Cat from this series would be, but, you know, not so much smaller that it would look odd if you were to have him on there. Let's pop him on and see. He can still ride on there, and he does look a little bit bigger, but, you know, it's not horrible. Alright, here he is next to the vintage 1981 He-Man figure. This is actually a commemorative re-release, which was cast from the mold of the original figure, and I cannot remember what year these came out. I want to say 07 or 08 for some reason, but I don't know if that's correct or not. But it was a re-release and not the actual vintage figure, but it does come with the soft squishy head like the vintage figures do, and I'm actually glad to have this one. It was a gift from a fellow collector friend of mine, and I had never had a classic He-Man figure as a kid growing up. I had gotten superpowers and some, you know, all the stuff since then with Kenner, with Batman Returns and all those kind of figures, and up into modern day figures, but I had never actually had a He-Man figure, even though I was very much intrigued by the figures and a fan from a distance. So looking at this figure, it's really cool, and I'm very glad to have it. And the way you can tell, if you are curious about the difference, if you look here, the hair, the paint job is slightly different, but if you look at the hair, the grooves in this are not as deep as the grooves on the classic figure. They're much more pronounced, and you can see they're cut a whole lot deeper. There we go. Well, no, stupid. No. What you doing? Hey, knew you could do it. You can see this actually is a 1981 vintage Prince Adam figure, and you can see how deep the grooves of the hair are. And then on this one, the paint's a slightly different color, and because it's a recast, the grooves of the hair are not quite as deep. That's kind of a dead ringer giveaway. If you're ever looking to pick up one and you do want a true vintage figure, that's one of the things that gives it away. Also, the original ones were made in Taiwan, and then these reproductions were made in China, so that's another giveaway. And there's a couple other minor differences. The harness on these does not close and stay closed quite as well as the original, so I don't mess with mine a lot since I got it to stay closed. But the original one goes together really well, but this reproduction, it's a bit stiffer, and the clasp, because it's a recast of the original harness, is it doesn't close quite as well and stay closed. Next, we have a DC Direct Superman figure. This is the Public Enemies line. They were a bit limited in articulation, really basic and a lot more like a classic figure as far as the number of points of articulation. You basically have a bend at the knee. You have they just rocked a little bit forward and back here, not even a full range of motion, no swivel at the waist. These sockets here did real well at the arms. They function kind of the same as these do, with not quite as much of a range of motion, but no upper bicep swivel. They only had swivels, no hinges at the wrist. They had a single bend at the elbow, and then the head is just on a swivel, so you can only look left and right, no up or down movement or tilt back and forth. But still a beautiful sculpt, and really, really nice to look at. They make a better display piece than what you would want to use for figure photography, probably. Here he is next to a Marvel Legends Wolverine figure, which is on the shorter end, height-wise, of your standard Marvel Legends figures. And then we have Spider-Man here, who is probably about average height for a Marvel Legends figure. And so you can see, looking at the two of them, the difference there. Here we have him next to the Avengers first film Walmart exclusive Hulk figure. Great figure, I definitely recommend if you can find one to pick it up. It's probably my favorite Hulk thus far, second only to the Hulk that is going to be released in the 2-pack with Wolverine coming out here at the end of this year. Those two Hulks would probably be the best Hulks, in my opinion, that Marvel Legends has ever put out. I keep having to scoot the camera farther and farther back, but this is the Sasquatch Build-A-Figure from Marvel Legends. This wave is 3 years old or so, probably, give or take. But a really neat figure, and they both have loincloths, so maybe they're cousins or something. But anyway, I think these Build-A-Figures, a lot of them would look really cool in toy photography with some of these Masters of the Universe figures as like trolls or monsters or, you know, creatures that they might encounter. So definitely worth looking at some of those for some figure photography potential, if that's what you do. And last but not least, here he is next to the Diamond Select Rhino figure. They did a Build-A-Figure for the Rhino as well, but it's not quite as big as this figure, though it is a little bit better articulated. I think the sculpt and the paint on this Diamond Select one is far superior, and it's one of my favorite figures in my collection. I did briefly want to mention, in a nod to the He-Man style figures from the early 80s, Savage World has done kind of a re-release of Thundercats figures in kind of the same vein and styling as the Masters of the Universe figures, and I think they look really cool. They've been out for a little while, and supposedly there's going to be a second wave coming out with Chitara and Tigra and a couple others, so keep your eyes out for that if you're waiting on those. And if you weren't aware, those are going to be out soon probably, unless they got discontinued. The toys have been kind of squirrely lately with stuff getting canceled and put off, so I'm not exactly sure what the status of those is at this point. But the other ones are out. You probably find them at GameStop. If not, you can pick them up on eBay. I don't think they're that expensive. They're a cheaper figure, maybe around 10, 15 bucks or something like that. So if you collect Masters of the Universe figures and you also had the Thundercats figures, you'll remember that their sculpts were a lot different, a little bit different scale. Though still fairly similar, but these look a whole lot better with the Masters of the Universe figures because the styling is almost exactly the same. Alright, well, thank you for watching today. Please let me know what your favorite Masters of the Universe figure is, and let me know if you have these figures, what you think about them, if you've enjoyed having them. If you've got a huge collection or a small collection, or like me, you've just kind of got a mixed bag of different figures throughout the different generations. And thank you so much for tuning in. Please leave a comment below, like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you guys next time. Keep collecting, and I'll catch you later.